two, you're writing in too much of an academic voice. And so we're seeing your storytelling voice, which is so strong, and then you start to try and teach people and you go into academic voice. So all that to say, there was so much research that went into this book, but a lot of the endnotes were original to the book that we later took out and transformed into story. But the very first, this is what I was going to say, the very first note comes from a study from the book Nurture Shock, which was written 10 years ago, or published, 10 years ago. But the authors write that non-white parents are 3 times more likely to enter into conversations of race, while 75% of white parents never or almost never talk about race. So in that way, full circle back to what you were saying, it still is a problem. It still is something that every single one of us has to learn how to talk about. We have to learn how to talk about issues of justice, race, and privilege at our dinner tables, no matter whether we identify as a person of color or not. Every single one of us needs to start having these conversations. And a lot of us still don't know how to have these conversations.
No, they don't. And it's, that's why your book is opening up dialogue in a way that it makes people want to ask questions. And that's why I think everyone should read The Color of Life by Kara Meredith, audience. But, you go through this, and when I read that part about colorblind, I must have bypassed that part of school because ours was just flat out ignorance. But not ignorant in the way that, hey, let's call it something and then be ignorant. I must have bypassed that part because I'm a little older than you. But you are definitely, it's hitting on a chord that I cannot imagine, one, because I'm a white, but I cannot imagine what the children must have felt by, one, not being seen, and 2, not being valued by what they're being seen as. And to me, that's just, consequences that are astronomical, not only within the soul of the individual, but also passed on and passed down and, spread out in society. So, you're tapping on so much of what we've all grown up with, not knowing that we were so blind or so ignorant or so insensitive to so many things. And, it's important to have these things and these topics and these conversations brought up so that we can talk about the basics, because it's unfortunate that we have to learn the basics, but we do. We have to go back to, things that we should have been taught and learned in kindergarten. You were talking about, how in opening up our eyes and becoming more sensitive and becoming and opening up dialogue. Let's talk about some things that people of faith can do to address racial injustice. Are there some concrete ideas or things that you feel people who want to create a bridge can do to address racial injustice more?
Absolutely. I'm going to pull up an article that actually just went live last week, and I'll send this to you if there's show notes or if your listeners want to read more. But I just actually had published last week. What's that?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. I had an editor reach out and say, hey, would you please write an article about concrete actions people of faith can take to address racial injustice. So I will send this to you, but it's kind of exactly answering your question. The first thing, we tune our ears to hear. And I would say for all of these, it doesn't matter whether you identify as a person of faith or whether you don't. This is something for every single one of us, but we adjust our ears to hear. My mantra, quite honestly, is to listen and learn and listen some more. And so for me in particular, and I think for all of us, but what does it mean to start listening to the stories that I haven't thought have mattered? What does it mean to listen to the stories of my brothers and sisters of color? what have I not heard because I haven't taken the time to listen in the first place? The second thing is to start doing our homework. 3 of my favorite books to read when it comes to entering into these conversations, Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, The Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby. If any of your listeners are in Jackson, Mississippi, Jamar and I are going to be doing an event together in April. So you can check out my website, karameredith.com/speaking for more information. And then for those people who do identify as white, one of my friends wrote a book a couple of years ago called White Awake. His name, the author, is Daniel Hill. But it's a phenomenal book, especially for people of faith who want to start doing their homework. Number 3, raise your awareness. So entering into conversations of racial justice means raising our awareness. I think for all of us, that means that we begin listening to the voices of those we haven't always heard. But, most of us are on social media. So I would highly suggest going and making sure that you are following and listening to the voices of people of color, access websites created by racial and ethnic minorities, start watching some documentaries. We can pray for new eyes to see or meditate on having new eyes to see. But I often ask an audience, who are you not seeing? Because some people will say, well, I live in an all-white community. And I say, well, that is great, and I don't think you do. Who are you not seeing? Because you don't have to see them. 4 last ones, we get proximate. Brian Stevenson, the author of Just Mercy, he talks about this a ton, but he says we have to get proximate to the pain. And again, that's not necessarily about entering into an interracial marriage or about raising children of color, but what does it mean to get proximate to truly enter into relationship with our brothers and sisters of color, so that we can begin to understand and empathize with their pain. The last 3, to embrace holy lament. I think this is a huge one. This is where we recognize both on a personal but also on a systemic level the injustices that are present. Sometimes that means that we say sorry. Sometimes that means that we say sorry personally, but we also say sorry corporately. And the last 2, we commit to the journey and then we repeat. So committing to the journey means not just embracing conversations of racial injustice or of learning about historical figures that are Black or African American during the month of February, but we commit to this around year-round. We say, okay, I'm going to commit to learning and growing, and then we do it all over again. So that's part of the article. I will send that to you right now.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you, Kara. I really appreciate that. That's there's so much that when we look outside of ourselves, we feel and see a little differently. And, it really doesn't take that much of a tweaking our perspective to really, gain a little bit deeper awareness of what our fellow brother is experiencing. And, at this time in life and this time in our society, there's never been a greater time to heal the gaps that exist. Mm-hmm. And in coming back to your father-in-law, the wonderful James Meredith, he kept asking you a question, and I want to end our interview on this. He kept asking you, you know what I'm going to ask you. He kept asking you, why are you writing this book? And in your own frustrations of trying to answer this to the best of his acceptance, I loved your answers, by the way. Tell us. I mean, I see the many reasons and the layers of why you wrote this book. It's a great, wonderful storytelling, healing book. I think that this is a conversation we need to have at our dinner tables. I think we need to teach our children how to love one another beyond what we look like, because there's so much beautiful diversity in our country, and it's happening so much more frequently, thank God, that we are looking at things so much differently. So coming back to your wonderful father-in-law, tell us, Kara, why did you write this book?
Yeah, well, that was the exact question that he kept asking me. This was on the trip that I mentioned. I flew out to Mississippi to interview my father-in-law, to spend some time with him and the family, just by myself, without my husband or the boys. And on our last day together, we were going and visiting all these different sites in Jackson that had been of historical significance to him and to the work that he had done, or the work that he is known for. But he kept asking over and over again. He said, "Why are you writing this book?" And I would say, "Well, because people are fascinated about the story of a white woman who married your son." And he would shake his head. I had gotten it wrong. "Why are you writing this book?" And I would say, what am I not saying here? And I would respond, because I have a story to tell. Because white people need to understand that issues of race have something to do with them too. Why are you writing this book? Because I want justice for my sons and for my black and brown brothers and sisters. And although all of those answers were good and noble and lovely, they weren't the answer that he was looking for. And the answer, I think, came later. And that was, I was writing this book entirely for me. And I was writing this book because I had to embrace and believe that justice and wholeness and peace were also for me. I was writing this because, yes, because of my brothers and sisters of color, but in realizing that wholeness and justice and peace, those are all the root of the same word, by the way. And so in realizing that that was mine, that I too am part of the beloved community, I can't help then but lay down my power and privilege. There's then something that happens when I have this realization that then I just want it for everyone else. So then that makes me fight. But I have to first realize that for myself. So that was the answer to the question. I was writing it for me. And I think that's what it is for every single one of us. We are invited to the table. We are the beloved community. And when we realize that and recognize that, we also see who isn't there or who hasn't been given full benefits, and we want and desire that for them. So for me, that I sit here and I go, wow, what an honor. My job now is just to have conversations about this conversation. So like with all the book tour stuff, we're not having Kara, the white lady, get up to read or talk about the book. But what we're doing is we are having me enter into conversations with friends of color, and it's a legitimate conversation in which we're each up there on stage and we're sharing our stories, because this is how we begin to have healing and have, again, ultimately maybe have justice and reconciliation.
Oh, I love it. I love it. This has been such a wonderful hour, and honestly, I guess God, knows what He's doing always, because we needed the hour.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna have to do, like you said, another show. I want to have the participants of the film Imaginary Films on. I want to talk to you again. We'll do a recap after your book tour, and we'll just revisit this and talk again about what conversations came up about the color of life. Kara, thank you so much for coming on today. Yeah. It has been a joy talking to you. I love your book. I think this is just a fabulous discussion, a fabulous book to open up eyes and hearts and discussions, and I wish you all the success and love in the world. Thank you so much for coming on, and I look forward to talking to you again. Where can my audience find you on your website?
Absolutely. So my website is karameredith.com. Otherwise, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Kara Meredith Wright, and I'm on Twitter at KaraMac54.
Wonderful. God bless you, Cara. God bless you and your beautiful family, and thank you so much for coming on Unlimited Realities today.